All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is something that I've been very interested in, but I've never got a chance to sit down and trying to get a spreadsheet and get all the numbers and start to address some of the questions that I asked myself, because I wasn't at the point that I have a strong trigger to do that. So for the rest of my presentation is all text, numbers. So this is only picture I'm going to show you. So enjoy this brief moment. Not my house. I don't have that car. I don't have that home storage facility. I do have PV on my roof, but this is the kind of picture I have always been thinking of. You take energy from the solar and drive all your electricity or energy using durables in your house. So I have PV installed in 2019, and also I'm interested in other sort of energy using devices like home storage systems and electric vehicle. Steve and I also supervised an honors project in 2020 on the pollution aspect of electric vehicle alternative. And we have all seen a lot of industry media hype talking about EV or how close we are to a large-scale EV penetration or large-scale deployment of household energy storage systems. But to me, 2021 is the real banner year. We've seen incentives rolled out in most states. We have official announcement of state level, national level of the electric vehicle strategy that is consistent with the net zero emissions by 2050 set by the Australian government. All these strategies plans been announced in the second half of 2021. We also seen people talking about these magic figures: $100 per kilowatt hour for electric vehicle, or $7,000 per home storage system, or alternatively, you're looking at 10-year or 7-year payback for a home storage system as indicators of large-scale penetration in the market. And why and how close we are, and you need more information. But the real trigger for me to sit down and work deeper into the numbers, the messy part of the calculation, is the $2 per liter petrol prices, which is norm now. So that's the real trigger. And then the questions I pose to myself are these: how far are we from battery price parity for electric vehicle? So you consider an electric vehicle similar price or competitive with a comparable internal combustion engine. And also, what is the level of break-even point for a home storage energy system? The second question: what policy incentives are in place at the state level, federal level, and what are justified? And we obviously we need to do some homework, getting all the numbers from the state government policies. And the other related questions are: what are the market failures we're talking about here? So when you talk about incentive, what level you need to set, and is this justified? Why we want to put an incentive there? Implicitly, you're talking about market failure in place, right? You correct for that market failure. And we also see this target, the final 20 to 50 year target and interim target set by the government. Can we achieve this with the current technology, with the incentive structure, with all the information we have? You should be able to work out what's the chance of achieving this target. If the government set the targets as they are, what are the assumptions made by the government? Or do we need additional supporting schemes to make that happen? At what cost? And what incentive structure? So to answer all these questions, I'm going to first present some of the facts and statistics to be able for me to come up with a simple model to answer these questions. Battery price has dropped substantially in the last few years. The Bloomberg keeps track of these trends for about 10 years, more than 10 years, because Tesla is the top selling model in Australia. So this is the benchmark car model I'm going to work on. comparing with other alternative cars, internal combustion engines. Tesla is way ahead of other industry competitors in terms of the cost of making batteries. So as you can see from the table, the cost for Tesla batteries are a lot lower than the industry average. And the last column gives you the proportion of battery cost in the retail price or recommended retail price of Tesla model. Looking at Tesla Model 3, if you're familiar with the models, this is the model that is the most popular and a best-selling model in the Australian market. So price, roughly, battery price half every 5 years. And so for the rest of the analysis modeling part of the presentation, I'm assuming 10% annual reduction in battery cost, which is not unreasonable. But because battery are relative new technology compared to other part of the car manufacturer, the cost component will reduce over time. And even in 2021, the cost component of battery in retail price in Australia is lower than the global average because cars are sold much more expensively here. And here I'm assuming 8% annual decay in this proportion. So over time, you see this proportion will reduce at 8% a year. Looking at the market, Australia is small. Right? The top market is Chinese market, followed by European market and the United States. But across all countries, 2021 have seen substantial growth. So global sales more than doubled in 2021. On average, we see 8% sales penetration in 2021, but in Australia, we are less than 2%. That means 100 cars sold, less than 2 cars are electric vehicles. Now, on the policy side, we have different policies supporting the market development, stringent fuel economy emission standards, compulsory phase-out mandate for internal combustion engines. At the moment, there are more than 20 to 30 countries having this kind of mandate, and also infrastructure construction, but mostly charging stations. And the other major areas is consumer incentives, different types, subsidies, rebates, concession on registration cost, and also some countries or state in Australia providing parking and driving privileges as well. So this is the global picture. And in Australia, the top section of the table, the first column, I have the fleet penetration in 2020. That's not the sales penetration, that's the fleet. How much of the fleet is electric vehicle. Second column, the total number of charging sites by state and the nation as a total. And the last column are the incentives, consumer side incentives at different states. These are the numbers calculated by myself using the documents information released by different governments. Right? That's the per purchase incentive level. At the federal level, there's no consumer side direct incentive other than the recent increase of the luxury car tax threshold. So that's like a reduction in the tax you pay for purchasing some types of electric vehicle. For some cheaper models, this have no impact at all. The majority supporting incentive from the federal government are to the infrastructure side, basically increasing the charging station in different areas. The federal government has made it very clear there will be no compulsory phase out, and also there's no mandatory fuel economy emission standard in Australia. There's an industry-led initiative from 2021. Basically, you need to have a label on your newly purchased cars showing the standard, but there's no mandatory standard imposed by the government. State level policies mixed, consistent with the global side of story, rebate, stamp duty reduction, and in some states, like states in the eastern side, they allow electric vehicle to get into the carpool lines as a privilege, low interest or interest rate loan or other kind of supporting schemes. So you have sort of strong support from the state, but not so strong from the federal government on the consumer side. Home storage, same story. We have different supporting schemes from different states, and again, no federal support. There's no support in WO. I should mention that with the electric vehicle, WA is unique. No support at all. Right? There's no incentive at the moment to support electric vehicle purchase in the state, and all other states has some sort of support. And the first column here is the number of home storage batteries in different states. This is the number released by the Clean Energy Regulator, which is voluntary. So there's another industry estimate of the actual numbers, which is more than double the official statistic from the CER. And so in this space, again, WA has no household level incentives. The strategy, the approach taken by the WA government is support for grid scale, large scale storage facility, and also on Powerbank community battery trials. I will touch on this briefly later. So, and the Powerbank community battery trials is kind of unique in the country. No other states have taken this approach. Now, get to the question. So this is the first question. From my own perspective, should I replace my old car with an EV? I have two cars. Second column, ICE1, ICE2. ICE1 is my main driving machine to all the long distance travel, vacation, or the remote area needing four-wheel drive capacity. The second one is the small car for commute purpose used by my wife. Ideally, I would like to replace ICE1 because highly inefficient. I need to get rid of it. But this is the only machine that can get me to the remote area, which is something that I cannot drop that sort of functionality, right? So I need to keep ICE1. I know this is bad, but the exercise is based on replacing ICE2 with the Tesla M3 model. Now, the calculation in the second column here is the scenario that I don't have a PV. Right? That's all the assumptions I made, and all the numbers are based on my actual numbers. I keep track of all the spendings and petrol prices and tariff I paid, and the mileage I drive over a year. And then the calculation gave me at the very bottom panel, because I live in WA, no supporting scheme. If I replace second car with M3 Tesla, out-of-pocket net cost is over $6,000. If I live in Queensland, down to $3,800. New South Wales, $1,000. Right? This is the difference of the incentive, but still pay an extra cost. However, because I have PV on my roof, right, I don't need to pay high electricity price. I pay much lower, right? So that gives me a slightly better scenario. I pay only $2,000, and accordingly, in the other two states, actually, it makes sense for me to replace immediately because it costs less. And I forgot to say that I also factored in a resale value for my old ICE1 car. Right? But this is just me. And other people might have different scenarios. So this table gives you a summary of different scenarios. First one, want to replace I have two cars, replacing one, same deal. This is my case. Second one, second column, that's the 1-1 replacement. You have one car you want to replace with EV. Third one, again 1-1 replacement, but you have a high profile car at the moment. Not at the moment. You want to buy a new car, but a high profile new car. By saying a high profile, I mean priced equivalent to a Tesla M3. That's about 6K to 70K. You're looking at that range. The fourth column, a new purchase, but not a high profile. I'm using the top selling model Corolla, which is 25K to 30K range. And then you drive low kilometers, low maintenance, that's the low profile. The other is high profile. So these are different scenarios. The last column is kind of interesting is because I labeled ICE star, I don't have a model there because this is the model that I'm trying to work out with all the assumptions. What is the equivalent ICE in the market to be equivalent to the Tesla M3 model? And $28,090, that's the difference I worked out for equivalent ICE, right? That's the price difference. If you have an ICE car, say Tesla, Corolla, priced this much lower than a Tesla, they're equivalent based on this assumption. The driving distance used is average distance for Australia drivers in 2021. That's about 11,000, right? So that's what we have here. The this is a lot of results here, but the key message here, we are reasonably close to that price parity. Okay, with some incentives, you might be cross that parity line already in some states, but not all. But also, there are differences across different individuals, right? If you're in column 1 or column 2 and column 3, you might, be how far away from the parity. So that's the difference across these different columns. Now, based on that model, now I can work out what is the price parity cost for batteries given the incentive structure in different states, and also the year that we can achieve this price parity. And on the top, this is the assumption that I use. 25% is the cost component of battery in the car, 3% discount, and I slightly changed the discount in the second column. So here you can see that the 5% a slightly higher discount rate only push back the battery price year achieved by only 1 year, right? And we are all very close to that point. Just 1, 2, 3 years from now. Right? The only thing that is highly uncertain here, although I use a higher discount rate, 5%, but research have shown that consumers' discount rate are a lot higher in terms of these energy using durables, which I will slightly touch if I have time in the end. Powerbank, home storage. So I start with this because this is one of the current options that the Western Australia government offers to consumers. There are currently 13 Powerbank community battery trials. There are 2 subscription options, size 6 and size 8 kilowatt or 6 kilowatt. There's a daily subscription cost. It's not a free choice. You need to live in the trial ICA, and also you need to be approached by Synergy. It's not that I contact Synergy, can I join? They will approach you. You need to be in the category that have a suitable consumption pattern. And then the next are the tariffs that we currently pay as average consumer, or the tariff you pay if you have a PV, or you pay a lower off-peak tariff for Powerbank trial if you are in the trial. Right? So there's advantage of joining the Powerbank. The negative side is that you pay a daily cost. So I use myself again as an example. I have PV. I have on average about 8 unit import from the grid, and project that to Australian average household with PV is about 11.6 unit. If you're an average household, that's your story. But me, 8 unit import. I have Australian average household has an average consumption of 18 unit daily. Mine is 14. Right? And I use a CPI electricity 3.9% from ABS, and discount rate 2 options, 3% and 5%. And then I can work out what is my out-of-pocket cost if I join this trial. And the conclusion is I need to pay something out of my pocket to join. So it's not worth going unless I have other motivations, right? Externality or anything that I want to contribute as a good citizen. And the next column is the break-even import size. Only if your household is above this threshold, you're going to have a positive net benefit, right? At any size below, small household, you're incurring a cost. Home storage, how about I buy a home storage at my own house? Assumptions, again, these are the industry quote for an 8-unit battery, 11,000 on average. I have a 6 kilowatt PV with 28 point gross output annually on average. I also have other stats on my net output, average usage, and also again daily import of 8 units. So the idea is to replace this daily import of 8 units with my storage, because storage energy is cheap, is basically free from the PV. And the battery has about 3% decay, annual decay. The usable capacity will reduce over time. And then I make these assumptions about tariff and 10-year life with warranty. That's all common stats, not made up by myself. Same CPI discount rate. Out-of-pocket money now cost is higher, right? But this calculation is not factored in the incentives. If you have incentive, you live in some state with some incentive, you might not have a net cost. Right? It might make sense for you to install a battery. There are always cheap battery options. If you go for high premium product, then that's a different story. And then you can also work out the 7-year payback and 10-year payback. The reason I calculate these 7-year and 10-year payback is because these are the indicators that the industry use for large-scale deployment, right? Apparently, these prices, 4,000 to about 6,000, is still far away from the average quote of 11,000 in the market. So you still need some incentive to cross that line. But in some states, you are not far away. You're very close. Now, having said all this, incentives, packages, what are the market failures we're talking about here? You need a justification for government to spend this money, right, on supporting these adoptions. We all pay fuel tax. In terms of electric vehicle, we pay fuel tax, but that's not designed to address social environmental externality. That's used for infrastructure maintenance, building the roads, maintaining the roads and bridges and all other highways. The external benefit of electric vehicle or external cost of driving, fossil fuel cars, mainly focused on 3 areas: greenhouse gases reduction, health cost, noise. These are 3 main categories. These are the recent estimates from Electric Vehicle Council. The uncertainty here is with the greenhouse gas emission benefit, because it depends on the grid mix. If the grid is completely clean, then it's good, right? You don't have any emissions from the grid. But if the grid is very dirty, coal-fired, then replacing that fossil fuel with electric vehicle is not necessarily clean, right? You need to do some careful calculation. Actually, the honors project we supervised with Steve is working on that aspect. So this bit of calculation is the final result is that the external benefit per electric vehicle, assuming that the electricity from the grid is green, is about $3,000 to $10,000. So that's the range, providing a justification for an incentive. And the current range of EV incentive across the states is about 0 to 5,000. So not wildly different, but there's a room potential to do more, right? So we are not over subsidizing the purchase of electric vehicle. The external benefit for storage, more complicated. So I'm not doing that calculation because home storage or community storage trials, they have benefits of smoothing out the demand supply, so you have lower costs at peak time, reduce the risk of blackouts, also reduce the need for the grid augmentation in some cases. So that involves much more complicated modeling. So I'll leave that out of the discussion. The government set the national target, zero net emissions by 2050, and also matched with other state and sector level targets. Again, achieving carbon neutrality by the same year, and also in terms of electric vehicle, they also have these interim targets of EV purchase penetration by 2030. We have targets, but we don't have a map. or at least the details of these maps are not released by the government. There are a number of important questions you need to ask. Are household incentives needed? How much? What are the incentive structure over time? Do we need a mandatory phase out to achieve the target set by the government? By when? And then also, fundamentally, are the targets set by the government realistic? Can we achieve that with the current incentives and in the assumptions about the market? A key missing information or a parameter here is the demand elasticity. Right? We need to know how consumers respond to these incentives and cost reductions in the battery. And something related is the consumer discount rate. Something different from what is commonly used for this type of calculation is literature showing a pretty high demand elasticity for consumer durables. There's very little information out there on EV demand elasticity. The only piece of information I got is this recent working paper looking at California market. They have estimated the elasticity to be negative 3.3, already very elastic. For Australia, we don't have any information, but this is, my take on this. I have information about Tesla price change over this 2-year period, and also have track of the incentives introduced 2021. So that's again a price variation at the state level, and I also have the sales number the 2 years. So I can come up with a very rough static state average estimate for Australia, which is negative 12.5, very high. Okay. Static, possibly an overestimate because I use state average, possibly skewed to the upper side. And also there is some government procurement buy-in in the first year. So that's an upward bias as well. But can be refined if I go to state level sales later this year. I can refine that, but for now, this is okay. At least serve as an upper bound, elasticity. So the rest of the analysis is based on these two numbers, 3.3 and 12.5. A summary, if you need information, explanation of these numbers, I gave you later, but the last column, focus on the last column. First column are the incentive, 3 incentive structure I use, no incentive, medium incentive, and the highest incentive offered at the state level. That's 6,000. Last column, the year that we can achieve 100% EV sales, assuming 2 different elasticity. Using 3.3, no way that we can achieve even 100% EV sales penetration. Let's not even talk about fleet penetration, just sales, okay? Sales, no way. And then a carbon neutral fleet by 2050 is even more challenging. There's no way you can achieve that. Right? Second part, I use a very high elasticity, rough estimate. I can achieve 100% EV sales penetration about 2038. But because car a long-lived machine, by the end of 2050, you still have lower than 100% penetration in EV. So here you can see that even with the highest incentive, $6,000, and keep it that way all the periods, you still only have about 50% penetration in the fleet by electric vehicle. And realizing that the 100% EV sales already achieved 12 years before that, takes long to replace the whole fleet. If we put this in perspective, is this a huge cost? In this table, I also listed the total cost that to support that transition, right? And the last row here, if you have a 6,000 incentive per vehicle purchase, by 2050, the total cost for the Australian government is about 54 or 55 billion, or 7 billion if I use the lower elasticity. This high, very high, a big expenditure for the government. It depends how you compare, right? This is very much consistent with the number come up with the California study. They're looking at an interim target growth from about 330K to 1.5 million with a lower elasticity, and they come up with the total cost of 16 to 24 billion. But if you compare this with other energy project that Australian government is currently committing to, for example, the Inland Rail project in the eastern states, it's just a 1,700 kilometer freight rail. Right? It's not a comprehensive nationwide project, and the budget for that alone is 14.5 billion. The government also spent 10 billion every year to subsidize the fossil fuel industry, basically by reducing, providing tax cut, right, to these fossil fuel related industry. So it depends on how you see this. Is this cost high or low? But the bottom line is, even spending this money, there's no way you can achieve the target that's set by the government, unless you increase the subsidies, heavily subsidize and put in a mandate of phase out by mid-2030. Right? This is, again, another calculation I did using high elasticity. The government set the target of greater than 9% EV penetration in fleet. This is the national target. And we currently have about 20 million in the fleet with a 1.5 annual growth. The total sales, the record shows, is very stable, 1 million per year, new sale. What that implies, combine the increasing number of fleet but stable sales, implies that people use car longer and longer. Life is, vehicle life becomes longer. The current statistics is that the fleet has an average age of 10 years and a 20-year life. Right? So to achieve the target, 100%, or not 100%, greater than 90% EV penetration in fleet, this is the level of subsidy in the table, second column, per vehicle purchase, 41,000 to 12,000. This, the second one, total cost to achieve that target, that's about 500 billion. Lower cost if you have a higher discount rate. This is what's needed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. The government ready to pay this much? Okay, you can achieve that. So far, the modeling has based on the assumption that the annual sales is consistent with the history, stable, limited to 1 million. But what if you can allow the new sales to be greater than 1 million? And then you do the calculation, you see, well, this is common sense. Intuitively, you would see, let's just wait, right, till later years the cost drops down, and in the last few years we go all in and replace all the cars. That's the deal. So if this is the scenario, then the cost to the government is very low. You just need to put a minimum incentive to encourage that. But I would see this scenario very unlikely for a number of reasons. It is inconsistent with the car use habit. People keep car longer over time, and now you're requiring them to replace their car in the last few years. That's not going to happen, right? And also that also implies significant supply constraints. The model shows in the last year alone, you're going to see 6.5 million new EV sales. Do we have that supply capacity? Is that likely? Right? Global wise, do we have that supply? Infrastructure, another constraint, because you have so much new sales in just a few years. You have this dilemma. You need to have the charging station in place. Whether you build them and put them in idle for a long period of time with very low use efficiency, or in the last few years, you spent a lot of time to build the infrastructure, right? Or you face a lack of capacity, charging capacity. Right? So that's something that to be considered. And another factor that I didn't mention is the external benefit. And obviously, if you replace the car, the internal combustion engine with electric vehicle earlier, and we achieve these external benefit earlier, that's worth more than the benefit we achieve in the future because of discounting. Right? So this is what I did to include that in the calculation. Now, again, this is actually very intuitive. To minimize the total cost of achieving the target, you basically need to move some of the adoption penetration to early years. And in order to do that, because cost of battery is high, car price is high, you need some incentives in the early periods. And now the cost slightly increased to 2 billion mark, but again, that's not a big cost. And the optimal incentive structure would be a phase-down structure for the first 5 years, from about 9,000 down to about 4,000. So that's the optimal incentive structure to make that happen. But still, because we are allowing greater than 1 million annual sales, you still have the same challenge of supply constraint, infrastructure constraints, and also the inconsistency with consumer behavior in terms of using or car use. All the calculation, highly uncertain. I put uncertainty into categories. First category, reasonable with medium uncertainty. Prices, fuels, electricity price, battery cost projection. We have the history, and then we make projections not too far from reality. We can validate that prediction. And technology breakthrough. This is highly uncertain, but in terms of the lithium battery, we don't have much to do in terms of increasing the energy density. So the substantial technology breakthrough here is very limited. The second category is where I see substantial information is lacking. Consumer discount rates, the research out there, but it's very context specific. I'll touch on this. Next slide. Demand elasticity now and also beyond price parity. We have no information there. Right? My estimate very rough. Preference by consumer characteristics, income, household types, whether you have PV, home storage, that's going to change your behavior of energy use. The largest uncertainty, government incentives. You have a target, what's the underlying assumption? And what is implied policies to achieve those targets under those assumptions? Unclear, it's completely lack of information here. Huge literature here on consumer discount rate. Right? The most recent meta work on this is a paper in 2022. Across all discount contexts, average discount of 33% annually, correcting for public bias and all that kind of technical details. Lab evidence and field evidence are different, but both show that higher rate if you frame the context in a negative way, and rather than highlighting the positive side, you frame that the negative side. And the discount rate are also context specific. You see higher rate for health-related discounting or other exotic contexts than money-related context tax. For example, people are very impatient about something like vacation, getting a certificate, or some close contact with movie stars, or for example, kisses from movie stars, right? That's the literature. Down to the energy using durables, is a long history of research here, right? Early periods, the studies focus on single product, aircon, refrigerator, furnaces. Consensus here is very high, huge diversity here, high discount rate. More recent study look at a wider spectrum of energy using durables. Again, consistent with early research, high rate, but the more recent research focus on the diversity, heterogeneity by purchase type, difference over time, so being dynamic, and also substantial heterogeneity by individual characteristics. And one common finding is that a lower discount rate linked to high income and high education. So the uncertainty here is a big challenge for market and government or industry projection of new technology, because you don't really know what discounts to use. What is the real discount, consumer discount rate in that specific market? Right? This is hugely crucial for that type of prediction. And also that without that knowledge, you can be blind in terms of identifying potential adverse welfare effects of supporting incentives. Right? Might be that only the rich people are into that market and using that incentive. because they have a lower discount rate, right? So you need to have that information to be able to comment or advise on the distributional side of impact. Now, the last couple of slides. So Australia government last year, November, released this long-term emission reduction plan. They made clear 5 principles. Focus on technology, expand consumer choices, but no mandates. So clearly, there's no mandate. But as I mentioned, no mandates, no possibility you can achieve the neutrality in the fleet. And the strategy is completely focused on technology. And at the bottom here, I have the breakdown of the 100% carbon emission reduction. How are we going to achieve that? This is the government plan. 20% already achieved compared to the benchmark year 2005. 15% by global technology progress. This is looking at existing technology. And the government also relying on another 15% by future technology breakthrough. Uncertain, hugely uncertain. Nuclear energy, anything we don't know about. But we hope that's going to be achieved. Another 10% by offset, buying a renewable project in other countries and building trees, planting trees and that sort of things. The largest share, 40%, is going to be achieved by technology investment roadmap. This is the part the government think they can have a hand on. And to achieve that, the government come up with 10 strategies. Right? This is the 10 strategy. And in the bracket, I have the budget that is currently allocated or committed to achieve that. Some are very specific to a specific area, other are sort of economy-wide scheme. Out of the 10, 3 are related to the discussion I have today on the energy, on the fuels, on electricity, which I voted the option: future fuels, vehicle strategy, integrated system plan, and post 2025 the market design for electricity. Some are still in planning, some are already released. For example, the future fuels and vehicle strategy released with a committed budget, very small, 250 million. It's far from the numbers, any number I've shown you with this presentation. All right. So here I have the answer to my questions. Excuse me. We're reasonably close to the price parity for EV and also break even for home storage. Conditional on incentives. Fortunately, in WA, we don't have that privilege, right? Incentives are still needed to help consumer cross the line, and an incentive about 3,000 to 10,000 per electric vehicle seems appropriate, given that externality calculation. And some states already touching that, crossing line. And personally, I would definitely consider electric vehicle if we do have an incentive. Is 3%, 5% my real discount rate? I don't know. I can't really say until I reach that point. I need to buy a car, right? But I don't think that 40%, 30% discount rate is my story. It might be for other consumers, not for me. The current incentive structure with the cost projections, assumptions made, definitely insufficient to achieve the zero net emission target by 20. I don't know how the government come up with this. And the plan released last year, late November, also no details what assumptions they made that they think this is achievable. My calculation shows that zero net fleet requires very heavy subsidy or a compulsory phase out by early 2030s, because car lives 20 years. So that's why you need to have a phase out by about that period. And then, because you don't have any new sales, internal combustion engines, so by the end of 2050, you could have zero net fleet. All the calculations very rough and based on assumptions with little information on some key parameters. But I do see this is a very promising area, looking into consumer preferences, and down the road could also be some interesting work on grid impact planning, together with the adoption of home storage. And also you could have, with that modeling, you could have a lot of things to say about policy design, incentive structure, which is better, which is worth, and that kind of work. So this is going to be some of my research agenda down the road. which is I'm generally interested. I hope I can get some useful stuff out of this. I don't know about the time, probably, and thank you for not interrupting me. What do I do now? Get right? That's it.
Just stay there. Thank you, Chunbo. Very interesting presentation. I think it's quite a lot of data. Makes us think about our cars. Also, lots of ideas for research. I was just thinking, okay, in terms of preference, how much is there in terms of neighborhood, effect, like imitation and that type of stuff?
Yeah.
Economists tend to think of conspicuous consumption, but you could have the opposite happening, people not wanting to show off their wealth. But then if you have more of these cars in the neighborhood, it becomes just easier for people to jump in. So has that been studied? So that's a question in passing, but I will just open the forum for questions. So who wants to ask questions?
Yes.
Julian, yes.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I was actually working in the Treasurer's office while this policy was being worked out. So it was particularly interesting to me to compare the way we were thinking and the kind of modelling that we did, or that I did, to yours. Just a couple of things that you might want to sort of throw into the mix. One, of course, is range anxiety. And the issues connected with the fact that WA is rather different from Victoria or New South Wales in terms of the distribution of population and the issues that are involved with it. So there's a dialectical relationship between the RAC and state infrastructure planning process and the adoption of EVs. And so part of the piece, so far as the state government is concerned, is to invest in the infrastructure as a prior requirement for getting EV take-up, which everybody accepts in the WA case is going to be a bit later than everybody else. So that was one point, I think, and it's worth including that in the mix. Certainly that was part of our thinking. Second thing, and then I'll shut up, is that there are budgetary implications to EVs. There are budgetary implications to EVs, and that's also something that government has to worry about, particularly in relation to fuel duty. So when you model about EV take-up and you model that accelerating curve beyond 2025 or possibly beyond 2030, one of the constraints that central government has to balance between the subsidies is the question of revenue, because EVs chomp up the road like everybody else, but at the moment they don't pay the duty. And I think those are two things that I would throw into the mix in terms of the policy consideration, without wanting to excuse the fact that the state government hasn't done as much as one would want it to do. It was difficult. It was difficult enough to get them to do what they did.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. So raise your hands if you want to ask questions, or just I don't see any hands raised.
I don't know how to raise my hand here.
Okay, just speak then, or we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Julian. Regarding just your last point, I have actually 3 points to make. One for you and two for Chunbo. The range anxiety. We've been talking as if we were pure electric vehicles, but there also are hybrid and plug-in hybrid electricals. I'm making sure to say it's plug-in hybrid. That would probably deal with that anxiety in WA, because unless you go outside the Perth metropolitan area, of course you've got big distances and so on. So that could be an issue that throw in the mix, as you said. Regarding two important points, one was the supply constraints, and the other one was the demand side of things. So regarding supply, the fact that it's 1 million and would be able to go to 3, 4, and so on. From what I know, Chunbo, and I might be wrong here, but part of that constraint is artificial. It's companies from outside cannot actually, or not incentivize, or don't see any value in selling or opening up, selling points of electric vehicles in Australia because of the government policy. So it's an endogenous effect. It's they're not having subsidies, and then in fact the whole thing, like like electric vehicles being taxed as luxury cars, and things like that, doesn't make it attractive for external sellers to actually sell their cars in Australia. So that's an artificial endogenous thing, I think. Regarding the fact, the behavioral aspect in demand, where people tend to keep cars long, I don't believe, and I might be wrong here, but I don't believe that assumption holds when you go from one type of a car to another. It's true when you're actually within the ICE category. But once you get close to the switching point, I don't believe in some circumstantial evidence of people I've been talking with that they say when they get close to that point, it's a different game. They'll think differently, right? They might sell their ICE car at that point and buy an electric or a hybrid or whatever it is. So I'm not sure that assumption really holds when you go from one category to another. That's the 3 points I wanted to bring up.
Perhaps very quick response. Range, the average range of electric vehicles. So first of all, we're talking about pure battery vehicles. We're not talking about hybrid, because that doesn't help to achieve the carbon neutrality in transportation. You're still relying partially on, the petrol stuff. So talking about pure batteries, it could be plug-in, could be alternative model. Range, average range for battery Tesla model is now hitting 500K. That's the lowest model. Higher model, you go further away. How much, population, how many people need that range on a daily basis? That's why when I do my model, I don't replace my vehicle 1, because I need that 4-wheel drive to get to the long distance and rough conditions, right? But if you do have a household, you have 2 cars, one, normal use, city use, 500K, that's more than enough. That's more than you don't need that. Every day you have a top up electricity in the battery, and then that's enough for you. So I don't see that applied to a 2-car scenario, at least for the short to mid-term. In the long term, if you complete replace, by that time, I would imagine the range will be substantially increased. You still have 20, 30 years to go. That's one thing. The last comment, what is it? Consumer changing from one type of vehicle to another. The thing is, the model I just talked is based on a resale. I still have factored in a resale value for my ICE. The model I show in the last, to achieve the 100% neutrality carbon, which implies that you have 6 million, 5 million in the last couple of years sales, probably those people have just bought their ICE 5 years ago or 4 years ago. You're asking them to dump those cars immediately to get into the electric vehicle. And all of a sudden, the electric vehicle have no resale value at all. See that? There's no resale value at that moment. And that is a big negative factor for them to make that switch. And even now, if I want to switch to electric vehicle with the WA government has a 6,000 incentive on me, I'm still relying on a 20,000 resale of my old car. If I don't have that resale value, I'm far off from that parity line. Right. So yes, I agree. You still have you might have a structure changing from ICE to electric vehicle, but still, that's not a minimum amount of money. Your old car, if it's a new car, right? Car are long-lived machine. You're asking people 6.5 million households to replace their car in the last year. Probably some of those cars are very new.
Okay, but that's a bit of an artificial scenario. In reality, as people start buying electric vehicles, what's going to happen? Because people expect, change the trend to go in the future. The resale value of an ICE is actually going to go down. That becomes an endogenous. Resale value as well. And so that's not going to happen overnight, but over maybe a decade, and people are projecting that. And if they want to sort of stay ahead of the game and sell it immediately before the price of the ICE goes down, in fact, that creates a supply and demand, and actually price will go down anyway. So either way, you have that price going down of the resale of the ICE value. Did you include that in your model?
No, because this is not a behavioral model. It's just a static with all the parameters. But the point is, I buy your point. That's relevant. You need to know the preferences and consumer behavior. But the other major point I made is the government target of 100% fleet by 2050 is no way to achieve. Because to achieve that, you need a high subsidy or a mandate of phase out. Otherwise, even with a high subsidy, you're looking at a huge number of replacement in the last few years. And that's going to be a big challenge. Behavior-wise, infrastructure-wise, a capacity supply chain. But you're right. Some of other behavior aspects, if people anticipate something down the road, then they might anticipate that and then replace the car earlier. If we have that, that means there's another area that needing research, which I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chunbo. It's 12:03, so we have run out of time. So thank you. Very interesting. Thanks, Chunbo. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
And see you next week.
All right.